Hello everybody, this is Jones on J here. The United States used to be the country with the world's tallest buildings. Being the birthplace of the skyscraper in the late 19th century, the United States was home to the world's tallest building for over 100 years until the Petronas Twin Towers in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia stole the crown in 1998. Since then, the title of the world's tallest building has never returned to the United States. The United States is still building a lot of skyscrapers, but it doesn't seem focused on building the world's tallest building anymore. So why is that? Well, let's discuss that in this video. So first, let's start off with a little history lesson. The first skyscraper ever built was the Home Insurance Building located in Chicago of the United States. The building originally had 10 floors, however 2 more floors were later added, making it 12 floors, or 138 feet tall. Now that's only 42 meters, so you might be thinking, how is this building considered a skyscraper when the rule most commonly used nowadays is a skyscraper is a building more than 100 meters tall? Well, this was the first building ever to use a steel framework design, which would allow for taller and taller buildings in the future. Now, let's fast forward a couple years later to a building that I'm sure you've probably all heard of before, the Empire State Building. This building was completed in 1931, which was a time where a major skyscraper race was going on in New York City to see who could build the tallest building, with many contestants such as 40 Wall Street, now known as the Trump Building, the Chrysler Building, also another famous skyscraper, and the Empire State Building, which ended up dethroning them all as the world's tallest building. It rose an astonishing 1,250 feet, or 381 meters, making it actually the first building in the world to reach a height where if you were to jump off the top of it, you would actually reach terminal velocity before, well, falling to the ground. It also was the first skyscraper in the world to reach more than 100 floors. However, the Empire State Building also marked the first time the world's tallest building was built, where the space wasn't necessarily needed and in fact actually wasn't filled until almost 20 years after the building was built. I will talk more about this later in the video, but this is definitely something very important to keep in mind when answering this question. Now, let's fast forward to 1974, which was the year of the completion date of the last skyscraper in the United States ever to hold the title of the world's tallest building, and that was the Sears Tower. As the original name suggests, this building was built for Sears, which at the time was the world's largest retail company. At this time, Sears needed a new headquarters, one with approximately 2 million square feet. So when they approached the architects at Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill, they designed a new home for Sears, which would end up becoming the world's tallest building. The final product would be home to over 3 million square feet, which was more than Sears needed, but what Sears planned on using that space for was leasing it out to other tenants until their company grew to take over some of that space. The Sears Tower, now known as the Willis Tower, is 1,451 feet from the ground to the roof and contains 110 floors. Later on, 2 antennas were added to the top of the building, which when counted brings the total height to 1,730 feet. This building would go on to hold the title of the world's tallest building for about 24 years until 1998. That year marks the completion date of the Petronas Twin Towers located in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. These twin towers rose 1,483 feet tall, contained 88 floors, and took the crown of the world's tallest building away from the United States. Now here's where things get interesting. When lining the two buildings up side by side, the Petronas Twin Towers look way shorter than the Sears Tower. The Sears Tower has a higher roof, higher occupied floor, and when counting its antennas, it completely blows away the Petronas Twin Towers in terms of height. So how could the Petronas Twin Towers take the title of the world's tallest building? Well, on top of the Petronas Twin Towers are what's called spires, which are considered part of the building, while antennas are not. So the total height of the Sears Tower, only the roof is counted. However, with the Petronas Twin Towers, the spires are counted, and the spires are ever so slightly taller than the roof of the Sears Tower. This sparks a lot of controversy as not everybody agrees with this, including myself. However, Later on, when the Taipei 101 was completed in 2004, that building was higher than the Sears Tower in every way except for total height, including all masts, poles, antennas, etc. And by then, many people learned to accept that the United States was no longer home to the tallest building. And finally, that brings us to today, where the current tallest building is the Burj Khalifa, located in Dubai of the United Arab Emirates. It rises 2,717 feet tall, contains a whopping 164 floors, and upon its completion in 2010, it completely dwarfed every other skyscraper at the time, including the Taipei 101. And finally today, in 2020, at the time I'm making this video, when looking at the top 10 tallest buildings in the world, you'll notice that the United States only has one building in the top 10. Ranked number 6, the One World Trade Center in New York City rises 1,776 feet, or 541 meters, and it contains 104 floors. And within 10 years, it's predicted that the United States will no longer have a single building in the top 10 of tallest buildings in the world. So now that we've gone over the quick history of the world's tallest buildings, let's take a look at some reasons as to why the United States is no longer worried about building the world's tallest buildings. The first reason, which I tried to hint at a little bit earlier in the video, is the lack of demand. Skyscrapers are not cheap to make, especially in the United States and especially in New York City, where the price to build per square foot is a couple $100. Skyscrapers were originally created to solve the problem of building lots of square footage in a confined space. And if nobody needs all the space that the world's tallest building would provide, well then what is honestly the point of building it? Earlier in this video, when we were talking about the Empire State Building, a lot of you guys may have recognized that this building was built during the Great Depression, which was a huge economic downtime for the United States. This time is also where I'd make the argument where building the world's tallest building was less about the necessity of it and more about boasting the record. When the Empire State Building was built in 1931, barely that much space was leased out, and it wasn't even until the 1950s when most of the space was finally leased. And why is that, you might be wondering? Well, aside from obviously the Great Depression, all that space wasn't really needed at that time and wasn't really needed until way later in the life cycle. And sometimes, all of that space may never be needed ever. Take the Sears Tower, for example. The Sears Tower was built with way more square footage than what Sears actually needed. So much so that Sears never grew into that space, and as a result, it costed Sears a lot of unnecessary money. This, combined also with the fall of department stores in general, eventually caused Sears to lose a lot of money and no longer be the world's biggest retail company. And today, when looking at most of the world's tallest buildings, especially some buildings made in China, lots of them are empty and don't really need all that space. A study found that 60 floors is usually the maximum amount of floors that people and companies would need in a skyscraper to make it profitably suitable. So if there isn't really any demand for all that space that the world's tallest building would provide, what's the point in building the world's tallest building? The next point, I think, is lack of available land. When looking at New York City and Chicago, which are the two cities in the United States with the most skyscrapers, lots of the land is already filled with so many buildings that if a developer wanted to build a new building, they might have to demolish one or many buildings, which would overall bring up the total cost of building. Now you might be thinking, why not build it in a less dense US city? Well, aside from the lack of demand, many cities in the United States have a height limit set at 2,000 feet due to the close proximity of international airports. And given that if the United States wanted to build the current tallest building, it would have to be taller than 2,717 feet, which is 717 feet taller than that FAA height limit. Meaning that cities like New York and Chicago would be best suitable for a world's tallest building. Contrasting that to Dubai in the United Arab Emirates and many Chinese cities, most of these cities have lots of available land to build these buildings. Therefore, it would be way cheaper since you don't have to demolish any buildings to build the world's tallest building, and you have plenty of space to plan everything out. Plus, these countries don't have as many restrictions as the US does in terms of height limits in most cities, so therefore, they can build however tall they want. The final reason that I think I'm going to mention is the community approval. Many people complain about the large shadows that these skyscrapers can cast, such as what Central Park Tower casts on Central Park in New York City. And due to the fact that Americans have the legal right to protest, they can make their voices heard and often change the outcome of certain things. For instance, the Salesforce Tower in San Francisco was originally planned to be 370 meters, but due to protests concerning the shadow that this building would cast, it was reduced to 326 meters. And in New York City, as skyscrapers grew taller and taller and the shadows that they cast below grew bigger and bigger, many protests caused the city council to come up with regulations regarding setbacks in the design of the buildings so that they wouldn't cast as big of a shadow the taller they got. In countries like China, which are run by communist governments, the government can make whatever decision they want regarding on the construction of a skyscraper, whether the communities agree or not. Now, while there may be more reasons than just these three reasons I think are the biggest reasons as to why the United States is no longer concerned about building the world's tallest building. So overall, to sum everything up, I think the biggest reasons why the United States is no longer building the world's tallest buildings is the lack of demand, lack of available land in big cities, and the community approval. So while it may be a bummer to most Americans that the days of the United States holding the world's tallest building are long gone, you have to remember that tall buildings don't necessarily make a country any better or worse, and if there isn't really too much point into building these skyscrapers, then why should we? So I think that just about wraps up this video. As always, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to go ahead and give it a like and subscribe if you enjoy my content. We are on the way to 300 subscribers, so I'd love it if you join this journey with me. If you didn't like this video, well, I guess the other button works too. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter to stay up to date with what I am doing. Links on that in the description. So thanks a lot for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!